So, what should you do if you really panic when you are trying to speak in the language? You may have followed some methods that pushed you to speak from day one, and for you, that was too fast. You couldn't understand, you couldn't make sense of the sentences, of the questions, and of course, you were not able just yet to create your own sentences and to answer. So now, whenever you try to speak, you feel like that anxiety is going up and you end up panicking and not being able to understand or to answer to the other person. So, how do you get over that and start speaking again in a way that doesn't make you panic and that will eventually lead you to fluency? And if you're wondering who am I, my name is Esther. I am a doctor in language education. I have studied 9 languages to different levels of proficiency, and I trained for years and worked as a translator and an interpreter. So I do know a little bit about language learning. And my goal here is to share with you the real science of language learning based on reliable empirical research on how the brain really processes and learns languages, so that you can start taking the best possible decisions based on the best possible evidence and start seeing the progress that you really deserve in whatever language you are learning. This question was sent to me by Hilary, one of the members in my community. Hilary has been trying to learn Spanish for a while. She initially tried one of those methods that really pushed her to speak from day one. And even if she was investing many more hours than the rest of the people doing the program, she still felt like it was too much for her, too much, too fast, too soon. So she wouldn't understand when people would speak to her in Spanish. She felt it really difficult to try to make sense of what they were saying. And of course, it was too early for her to start making sentences. So she felt she was put on the spot when it was too early and she wasn't prepared. And then she just felt really, really anxious about speaking in the language and about the entire learning process. So now she's been trying to just read and listen for quite a while, but she's really concerned that she's not going to reach her fluency goals because, as I explained in this other video that I'll put in the description, when you're just reading and listening, you're going to become a very good reader and a very good listener, but you're not necessarily going to become a very good speaker. Those are very different skills that need to be trained in very different ways. So my goal was to make Hilary understand small exercises she can start doing to start very little by little speaking the language and feeling more confident without all of that stress and all of that anxiety that she has experienced before. If you also want to be able to ask me questions and get my advice on your very unique circumstances and problems, I invite you to check my community. The link is in the description. Or you may want to join my WhatsApp channel where I share regular updates and promotions that I don't share anywhere else, not even in my newsletter. Now, my first impression when I read Hilary's messages is that she has really been burned out. She's really been traumatized by this speak first approach that she followed for a while and that put so much pressure on her when she was not ready to start speaking just yet. Now, it's really interesting because we know from research that those speak from day one methods can create very high anxiety, not necessarily on everyone, but in a lot of students. And I've even had students I've heard going to language class and taking tranquilizers just before heading into the class because of how stressed and anxious they felt about having to speak in public in front of a group, probably too fast. And when they're not ready, they still don't have the language necessary to express themselves, yet they're put on the spot and forced to do it. So clearly those methods can be very toxic, especially if you're a bit self-aware and you're like not comfortable speaking in front of others. And again, what we know from research is that if your anxiety is really high, the information is not going to flow in or flow out. So we really need to do something about this anxiety. And the reason why that happens is because, in the amygdala, which is a part of the brain, there is a reaction that happens, which we call the fight or flight reflex. And what that does is that it's going to trigger a number of neurotransmitters that are going to start floating in your brain. And those chemicals that are kind of circulating in your brain are going to affect the functioning of a specific part of the brain that we call the prefrontal cortex. And that is the part that is in charge of planning what you're going to say and preparing your speech. So, of course, if you are under a lot of stress and every time we ask you to speak the language, you have like a panic attack, your brain is physiologically, like physically, unable to produce language. not just language, it's just unable to actually plan or think clearly. And I'm sure you can think of moments like this where this has happened to you, right? Even in your own language, that you need to maybe do a presentation and you see all these people sitting there and suddenly you feel like this is stress coming up and you cannot find your words anymore. Now, when you are trying to speak a foreign language, the problem is that you might be like piling up the anxieties because you may already have some speaking anxiety. And then on top of that, you're going to have the foreign language anxiety, which in research we kind of separated. We talk about it as a separate thing because you might have very low speaking anxiety, but very high foreign language anxiety. So that's why we try to keep them separate and we look at them as separate things. And there are different strategies that we can use to address each of them. So my first question for Hillary, it's exactly that. It's like, do you have this problem when you are speaking in English as well? Do you feel like you're not comfortable speaking in front of other people? Maybe if you're in a social group, you feel like you don't want to start a conversation or you don't want to give your opinion because you feel a bit self-conscious about how other people are going to perceive you. If that is the case, then your problem is speaking the language. Probably there is an element that has to do with that underlying speaking anxiety. And we would need to look into it in more detail and give you specific strategies like breathing exercises, visualization. So there are quite a lot of things we can do to help with that. But if in your language you're usually okay and this only happens in the foreign language, then we would say that you are suffering from very high foreign language anxiety. And now, because of all of that anxiety that you felt when you were put on the spot and you were forced to speak, every time you try to speak, your brain is defaulting to that state. It's defaulting to that high anxiety status where it's completely unable to produce language, which of course adds to the problem because now you're left thinking, maybe I'll never be able to speak the language. Maybe I'm just going to have to be happy for the rest of my life with understanding, but not being able to express myself. And those thoughts are completely wrong. That's not at all the case. We just need to work on that trauma that you have linked to how you were exposed for the first few times to speaking in the language. And we're going to have to, very little by little, make sure that you find your own voice in the language. So what I recommended Hillary to do is to start speaking, but step by step, we're going to go very, very slowly, because what we want to avoid is that anxiety, that panic comes back. So the first thing I told her to do is to start by shadowing. She's very used to working with audio and video files and listening to them. So now what I ask her is that very slowly, for maybe a few weeks, she starts shadowing what she hears. So she gets a sentence, she stops the sentence, she repeats the sentence, and then the next sentence, she repeats again, and then the next sentence. Now, the goal with this exercise at this point, it's simply that she starts articulating the sounds of Spanish with her own vocal apparatus. So even if she's been hearing a lot of Spanish, her vocal apparatus is not used to making these sounds. And this is something that it may take a while for the entire system to get used to making those special sounds that don't necessarily exist in English. So she's going to do that for a few weeks just to get used to hearing her own voice in Spanish in a very low stress environment, because she's just on her own. She can close the door, nobody's listening, reading, repeating what she hears and trying to imitate those sounds. If she doesn't make the sounds right, that's okay. She's learning. She just has to listen again and try to repeat them again. So there is a very, very low pressure to start with. Now, once she has done this for maybe 2-3 weeks and she's feeling more comfortable with pronouncing all of these words and making all of these sounds herself, the next step is to start speaking. Now, we can go in 2 tempos here, because she may not feel ready to start speaking and creating her own sentences in Spanish just yet. So in that case, what I recommend is that she may want to start writing what she wants to say. For example, so far we've been working with videos or with audio files, and she'll have some opinion about them. So it may be that she just needs to start by writing a few sentences about her opinion about this topic that she has just been listening to repeatedly and shadowing. So all the words are there, she knows how to pronounce them. Now it's the moment to maybe start writing an outline of what she wants to say, her ideas, and the words she needs and the structure she needs to say those ideas, and start by writing them down. So her brain goes from just receiving the language to creating language, to trying to express her own ideas with these new words and new structures that are so foreign to her brain. Now she's going to try to remember what she has written about, her ideas, those new words, those new structures. And without looking at the text, she's going to try to repeat those same ideas in the language. So this is not a memorization exercise. She doesn't have to remember those sentences by heart. She has to try to use the things that she has prepared to make her own sentences again. And at the beginning, it may just be 2, 3, 4 sentences at a time. And that is perfectly fine. When you've never really spoken in a language, just saying, I do not agree with this idea because my experience is this and I believe something different, even just doing that is a huge achievement. So for her to do that, she needs to be able to say what she wants to say, because that's important, that she feels like she's expressing her opinion, not just repeating some random sentences that somebody else said. But there is very, very little pressure. And if she gets them wrong, she gets them wrong. And if she mispronounces some sounds, she mispronounces some sounds. But she's already making that effort and training her brain to start producing language, not just in writing, but also taking those written words and expressing them with her vocal apparatus, with her mouth and with her throat. And then slowly, what she's going to do is to detach herself more and more from the written part and just articulate her ideas in speaking. But in order to do that, it may be that instead of writing the entire sentences, she's just going to write an outline and think in each little section of what I want to say, in each little idea, what words do I need, what structures do I need, and those are the ones that she's going to be preparing in advance. So this isn't a writing exercise, this is preparation for speaking so that we can go into speaking with the anxiety levels as low as humanly possible. And eventually, what is going to happen is that at the beginning, she's going to struggle a lot. Slowly, she's going to realize that she needs to prepare less and less to speak about those same topics. And then at that point, she can move to more complex topics. So maybe now she's going to try to speak in the past tense. And of course, the past tense is going to be a problem because now there are all of these past tenses we've got in Spanish and all of the different endings of the verbs. But that's fine. Now she can speak kind of comfortably about things in the present, and that she only needs a very simple outline to speak about those. But now she's going to be doing the same exercise to speak in the past. And maybe it's not the vocabulary that is going to be a problem now, but it's just going to be conjugating the verbs. So she's going to want to make sure that she knows which verbs she's going to use in advance and what's the right conjugation for those verbs in that specific tense that she's going to use. But then again, the exercise is that she's going to be speaking. If she wants to take it a step farther, she may want to record herself. So she starts listening to her in the language. She gets used to how she sounds. And also, she can even put those recordings through to ChatGPT or another AI tool that may give her advice and feedback on her pronunciation and the language itself. And once she's feeling a bit more comfortable with all of that, of course, what comes next is just trying to do that without any support. So just listening to a video or reading a text that is at a slightly lower level than the rest of the materials so that it's really easy and it's not going to give her anxiety. And she's just going to try to speak about that topic without necessarily preparing for it. Of course, at that point, she's going to realize the level goes down and it's going to be much more difficult, but that's all normal. And that's part of what you need to train if you want to be able to one day speak the language naturally. And what I've seen some students doing right now in 2025, it's that when they prepare their ideas and their words and their conjugations, they're not just checking on a grammar book or in the textbook like we used to do back in the day, but now they put it into ChatGPT or another AI, just the preparation, not the recording necessarily, but just the preparation. And they ask for feedback and they say, look, are these things correct? Have I conjugated the verbs correctly? Am I using the right vocabulary? This is what I want to say in English. I'm not sure if I'm using the right words in Spanish. And then they get the feedback from this AI, which of course is going to be quite detailed. If you tell like what's my level and what I'm trying to express and what I'm trying to achieve with this task, they get the feedback. And then once they have that feedback, they review that feedback. And when they speak, they are trying to incorporate that feedback already. And I find that extremely, extremely, extremely effective because they are already incorporating the feedback. So when they are speaking, they are sure that what they are saying, it's correct. It's not just I am preparing it in advance, but I don't know if it's correct or not, and I'm going to try to say it, and I am maybe reinforcing mistakes. No. Now we know that we're not making mistakes because it was corrected. I mean, AIs are not perfect either, so there may be mistakes, but let's say you're 99% there. And now you're using that corrected language to speak in the language. And you are much more comfortable because now you know that you're not making mistakes, unless, of course, you're deviating a lot from what you've just prepared. And even if you're making mistakes, you are on your own. There's no one judging you. So that is really a very, very gentle way to start speaking, especially when you have been traumatized. And what I always say in these cases, if you feel like at any point that anxiety is coming up and it's going beyond a level that it's manageable, then you stop. Okay, that day you stop. Maybe it's not a good day. You know, we all have good and bad days. Maybe days when we are dealing with other things, you know, if you've got kids, or if you've got your parents or your partner, and simply your brain is not on the best moment to be doing a task that on its own, it's already going to raise the anxiety levels. So we don't go back to forcing ourselves to speak the language. In that case, we stop straight away. We go back for that day just to reading, listening, and then we try again the day after. Or maybe we're just going to prepare the sentences, but if we cannot really articulate them, we leave it there, and then we try the day after. And why do we do this? Because it's very, very important that we retrain our brain to stop seeing speaking in the language as a high anxiety event. So in order to do that, we have to make sure that there is no anxiety associated to it for a long, long time. So we can break that kind of trauma that was created in that previous high pressure course where she was forced to speak. And just as the last note, because I don't want anyone to misunderstand what I'm saying here, Hillary is not going to stop reading and listening because she still needs to get exposure to the language. But instead of just reading and listening and thinking I'm not able to speak and I'm not going to do it because there's too much pressure and too much anxiety, now she is going to be taking small steps that will take her from her usual reading and listening into a more active use of the language, which will eventually help her use the language and become fluent one day if she keeps doing this progressively and consistently over a sufficiently long period of time. So if there is one thing I want you to remember from this video is that when there is very high anxiety, the brain can literally not absorb information or produce information. So the information cannot come in or go out. And before we can take care of any learning or of any speaking, we need to take care of that anxiety. And what research shows is that those speak from day one methods can create very, very, very high levels of anxiety in many, many students. So if you are one of those students, you do not have a problem. It's not something that you should be worried about, and there is nothing you are doing wrong. Some people just take a bit longer, require a bit more of time, a bit more of exposure, a bit more of space to be able to start producing language. And that is perfectly fine. You please do not feel guilty and do not feel like this is a problem that you have and that will stop you from becoming fluent. What you need are the right strategies to slowly start speaking in a very safe, judgment-free environment where you are going to be able to develop that ability, those skills, slowly, steadily, but surely. So you progressively increase the difficulty of the tasks and the demands that you are making on your brain. Now, if you are struggling with this kind of problem, I really hope that this video helps. I know there are a lot of students out there who are in this situation, and It's a shame because following this type of strategies helps and it can give you results in just a few weeks of doing them. You're going to be feeling much more confident and much more comfortable as well, and much more enthusiastic about your learning progress, like Hillary is feeling right now after she followed my advice. But if you are struggling to become fluent, there might be other reasons that are blocking your progress. And in that case, I recommend that you take a look at my workshop below. I've designed a very unique test that helps you identify why you are struggling to progress in the language. It gives you a very detailed report and provides a lot of advice and tips and actions that you can start implementing right away so that you overcome those blocks and can finally reach fluency in that language that you are struggling with. And if you are still doing one of those methods where you think maybe just by reading and listening you will magically become fluent in the language, I recommend that you check this other video where I discuss that question in a bit more of detail.